I did it, fool, all day long. When they said Brownside, I sell dope. I kill, I bang a mother. Blue rag all day. The red one.
Welcome to Boys in the Hood TV. Today we're going to be discussing the life of Toker from Eastside 13. Now, Toker was born Gilbert Izquierdo in October of 1966 in Michoacán, Mexico. Now, his family would later migrate to Los Angeles in the early 1970s. Now, as a kid, his family would move around from places like East LA to eventually South Central. Now, growing up, he would attend 20th Street Avenue Elementary, but only a year later, his family would move yet again, and this time he would move around 49th Street, and he would start attending Ascot Avenue Elementary. But by junior high, things would all start to change for Gilbert once he started attending Carver. Immediately, he would start hanging out with a lot of the homies from the barrio at school. Now, his parents were extremely old school, and they would always plead with him about staying away from gangs, drugs, and just trouble in general. But regardless of all this advice, Gilbert would eventually get put on to the Eastside 13. And after being quartered on, he would completely change his appearance, and he would start rocking khakis, chucks, hairnets, and wearing white tees. He was no longer just that good school kid, but now he was known as Toker. Now, he would quickly start making a name for himself in the barrio as a teen, from robbing, carjackings, and getting into fights with rival hoods. Now, as a young G, Toker was fearless and was known for walking into other barrios like Westside Pyramida Flats, the Playboys, and 38th Street. Now, around the mid-'80s, with the wave of cocaine hitting the streets, Toker would start hustling on 49th Street along with the rest of his homies. He would start making a lot of money, and he would start providing for his family when they didn't have enough money to pay rent or put food on the table. Now, like a lot of people around South Central, Toker would get addicted to smoking weed. But when weed wasn't good enough, he would resort to smoking on sherm sticks, which was extremely highly addictive. And this would lead to Toker sometimes coming home high off of weed and other times high off sherm. Now, his father worried about him a lot, so sometimes he would wait up all night long before work, waiting for Toker to walk through that door because he feared for his son's life. Now, Toker's gang-banging activity, he would find himself going in and out of jail on minor charges. But Toker's street activity would go from minor things to murder. But that murder charge would eventually be dropped, but he will be convicted on the other charges. Now, because he was still a teen at the time, he would be sent to Camp Glen Rocky in San Dimas for the next 2.5 years. Now, once released back on the street, Toker will receive a court order that he was not allowed to be back in LA County for nearly 5 years. But being the rebel that he was, Toker didn't care. But his home life was now completely different because his auntie would take custody of him. But the very same day that he wanted to go visit his family, he would find out that his family had been evicted from their home because they could not afford to pay their rent. And this would piss Toker off, so his plan was to hit the block and start slinging dope so that eventually he could save up to buy his parents a house. Now, after talking to his mother and his brother and sister, his father would walk outside. Toker would notice that his father's eye was swollen shut. So Toker would ask his pops what happened, and his father would tell him that he was hit with a bottle while playing pool down at the local pool hall. So he would call up his homies Spooky and Joker. He would have his father drive him down to that pool hall. Now, once they reached the pool hall, they would find the same man who attacked his father, put his arm in the door. He would close the door hard, smashing and breaking the guy's arm. Now, after smashing his arm, Toker would then take a beer bottle and smash it on the dude's face. Now, eventually, Toker would hit the block and begin helping his family get back on their feet. Now, by the 90s, gang banging had reached its peak, and Toker was still frontlining it, representing Eastside 13. Now, Toker would almost lose his life one day while out on the block on 49th Street. As Toker stood outside, working on his cutlass, with the hood popped up, a car would slowly come down the block, and out of nowhere, it would start dumping. Everybody that was outside would take off running, but Toker had nowhere to run because he was trapped on both left and right side. So in that moment, he stood there and he would make peace with God that this was about to be his last day right here on earth. But within seconds, his homies would come running outside, shooting at the car, and in the process, the car would take off, flying down 49th Street. Now, once the smoke cleared, Toker's car had been shot up and riddled with bullets. Now, Toker could be seen falling onto the ground, and his homies would come rushing to his side, believing that he had been shot. But by the grace of God, not one bullet touched him. Now, after this incident, Toker will always remind himself to never be caught slipping ever again, even while in his own hood. Now, Toker's younger brother, known as Felon, would bring one of his best friends named Chucky around, who he went to high school with. Now, Chucky wasn't from the hood, but Felon would tell Toker how Chucky had his back. Now, Toker would take a liking to him, but Chucky wanted to get put on to Eastside 13. But Toker was against Chucky being put on to the hood, but against his wishes, Chucky would get put on to the hood. And immediately, he would start putting in work and building up a reputation. And Toker would notice how wild Chucky was in the streets. He would give Chucky the nickname Danger. Now, it wouldn't be too long after this that the Eastside 13 would carve out a block in the San Bernardino area on 13th Street and Baseline Avenue. And immediately, once they took over this section, they would make enemies with the Verdugo gangsters and the Colton 13. Now, although Toker was still banging and hustling in the streets, he had other aspirations, which was gangster rap. Now, there were a lot of Chicanos who started getting into the rap scene, and they were making a lot of money, and Toker saw this as an opportunity to make some legit bread. Now, Toker, his brother Felon, Wicked, and Danger would decide to start a rap group. But before they could start laying down material, Toker's little brother, Felon, will be shot and killed in a shootout out in San Bernardino in 1992 at the age of 18. Now, this death will be heartbreaking to Toker and his family, but it will be met with violence and bloodshed. Now, Toker's other brother, named Lazy, will get immediate get back on his murder. And not long after, Lazy will be arrested and will be convicted of murder and will be sentenced to life in prison. Now, sometime later, Toker and his homies would start recording and put together a demo. Now, this demo would start being passed around the Vadios, and somehow it would land in the hands of Eazy-E. Now, once Eazy-E heard this tape, he would immediately have someone reach out to Toker and his homies so he can meet him. Now, after meeting Eazy-E around 1993, Brownside would sign to Ruthless Records. Now, right out the gate, Toker would let Eazy-E know that the Eastside 13 had his back if he needed anybody gone, especially anybody from Death Row. But Eazy-E would let him know that it wasn't necessary and he wanted them just to simply to focus on their album. But in the midst of Brownside recording new music, the Death Row beef between Eazy-E would start to heat up. Now, one day, Eazy along with Brownside will all go out to the Cheesecake Factory to get something to eat. Now, Brownside came 6 cars deep and lowriders. Now, while Eazy-E is getting his car valeted, he will be approached by 7 members of Death Row Records who came up talking crazy. Only seconds later, Toker and other members from Eastside 13 would start surrounding the Death Row members and pulling out straps. Now, ultimately, Death Row will cop pleas, and they will hop back in their cars and take off. Now, eventually, Brownside will release their first single under Ruthless Records called Gang Related.
I'm a true ass local and straight gang related.
Now, with the success of their newest single, things will start going well for Toker, and he will be making his parents proud, seeing that he was able to turn his negatives into a positive. Not only was he seeing success with his music, but eventually his girlfriend will give birth to 2 daughters for him. But after all this success for Toker, by 1995, things would come to a halt in March when Eazy-E would pass away. Now, this would devastate Toker because Eazy-E had become one of his closest homeboys. So with Eazy-E dead, there was a lot of uncertainty with the future of Brownside. Now, several months later, in early October, Toker would be out with his homies at the Universal City Walk to go watch a movie. Now, while standing in line, they would notice Tupac, who had just signed to Death Row, hanging out with a few females. Now, that night, Toker was tripping and he was on one. So he would decide to go approach Tupac and test his gangster.
And I'm like, so what's up, dog? So what's cracking, man? Tupac looked and looked at all my homies. And I'm like, damn, man, this fool probably think we gonna jump him or whatever. But I'm just trying to test Tupac, dog. Motherfucker grabbed this girl by the hand and just walked away.
Sadly, that same month, gang violence would come to Toker's family's doorstep. On October 27th, 1995, Toker's family was preparing to have a party at their home located in Huntington Park. Now, they end up canceling this party, and they had planned on rescheduling it. So later that day, Toker's 11-year-old sister named Erica and his father named Antonio decided to decorate the house for Halloween. Now at around 7 p.m., Erica and Antonio sat on the front porch as her brother Alex and her two friends from school were playing in the front yard. Now as they sat outside, a black Nissan Maximum can be seen driving slowly near the house. Now Alex saw the car pull up, but he assumed it was people that was coming for the party, which had already been canceled. But before he can say anything, the car window would roll down and an AK-47 will be aiming in his direction. And the man holding the gun was Chuchi from Florencia 13. And only seconds later, Chuchi would open fire. Now everyone would start running. Antonio would grab Erica and shield her with his body as bullets tore through the front porch and through their house. Now Alex would run and take cover behind a car, and Erica's two friends who were in the front yard would be struck with gunfire and hit over 5 times as they fell on the ground. Now once the smoke cleared, Florencia 13 would flee the scene. But in the distance, more gunshots could be heard near the corner as 2 more men were shot. Now Antonio would tell Erica to get up, it was over. But when she didn't respond, that's when he had noticed that she had been shot in the head. So immediately the family would call 911, who would arrive on the scene along with the EMTs. Now Erica and 2 of her friends would both be transported to Martin Luther King Hospital for treatment. Now both her friends would survive, but sadly, 11-year-old Erica would be pronounced dead. Now the other 2 men who were shot at the corner would also be brought in, and they would survive their injuries. Now word would immediately get back to Toker, who would be extremely sad, but also extremely angry. Now after the murder of his sister, Toker was out for blood, and he would immediately hit the streets and start putting in work and knocking shit down. But not only did the word hit the streets, it also hit the prison system, and the Mexican Mafia was not happy. Now in the early 90s, the Mexican Mafia had called a stop to all drive-bys for all Southsiders, and that if anybody violated this order, they would be dealt with. So only days later, the Mexican Mafia would get in contact with Florencia 13, a man named Perez, and Marino, who were both in the car with Chuchi, who had gunned down 11-year-old Erica. Now they had 2 options, give up the shooter, or Florencia 13 would be greenlit. So in return, they decided to give up Chuchi. Now only a week later, Florencia 13 would pay Chuchi a visit. A young kid by the name of Spanky from Florencia would get out the car and walk over to Chuchi's house and speak with his mother. Now seconds later, Chuchi would come outside, and in the midst of them talking, that's when Spanky would pull out a gun and shoot Chuchi straight in the head as he fell to the ground. Now he would continue to fire at Chuchi's lifeless body. Now only hours later after this shooting, Spanky, along with Perez and Marino, would all be arrested for the murder of Chuchi. Now after losing his sister, Toker was in a very dark place. Not only did he lose his brother in 1992, but now his baby sister. And Toker's anger would catch up to him, because only weeks later after his sister's death, he would be arrested on murder charges. Now his bail would be initially set at $4 million, but it would ultimately get dropped to $1 million. Now once he got released out on bail, he would start to fight the murder charges. But only 3 months after his sister's death, on January of 1996, Toker would get a phone call that the little homie Danger had been shot and killed while out in Colton, California. Now who the shooters were, it's unknown, but Danger was shot and killed in Colton 13's hood. Now with all the violence happening in his life, Toker felt like his life was in shambles, because not only did he lose a lot of family and friends, but now he's fighting for his life with this murder case. Now while out on bail, Toker would continue to record music, but by early 2000s, he will be found not guilty on those murder charges, but he will be sentenced on other charges. And Toker would find himself sitting down in prison over the next several years. Now while locked up, Toker would continue to write music, but he also would meet his future wife and future baby mother. Now by the late 2000s, Toker would get released from prison. Now at this point in time, Toker's only focus was his family first and then music. Now he would start making a lot of head waves on his social media accounts, while at the same time still dropping music videos and telling stories about his life. But sadly in 2015, Toker would get more bad news that his father had passed away due to diabetes. Now this would only add to the hurt and pain that he had been experiencing his entire adult life. Now eventually Toker would later decide to up and move from the United States to Mexico with his wife and son. Now there he would build a good life and he would enjoy being back in his birth country. But sadly, death would eventually come knocking for him. On October 10th, 2018, Toker would be at his home in Rosarito, Mexico, with his wife and son. Now, sometime later that day, 2 armed men would come into his home, allegedly dressed as police officers, and he would be shot and killed at the age of 52. Now, there are different rumors on who did it, but none of these stories have been yet to be confirmed. But the OG Toker will leave a long-lasting legacy from family to music. I would like to thank everybody for tapping in, and I'll see y'all next time.